want to bring in our panel right now, and tonight we're very pleased to be joined by Jeannie Zaino, a regular guest here, professor of political science at Iona College and professor of campaign management at NYU. And next to her, of course, Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. C. Scott Vanderhoff, attorney and former Rockland County executive, and Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent, who was at the Republican convention today. We'll get into that later, but I really feel that they got it right. I mean, it took a long time. There was a lot of delays, fights over dollars, fights over locations, turf wars and everything. But when it was all said and done, they seem to have gotten the right mix of both the remembrance it's supposed to hurt and bring back painful memories, but also to inspire that in the worst, we see some of the best of humanity. And I don't know, for me, it brought it all back, you know. And I know for so many people out there, and we all have different connections, some direct and otherwise, you know, it was like you see those things and it's got that visceral, you know, instinctive recall. And we all know where we were. We all remember what happened. It seemed like it was forever, but it was only a small chapter in time after it. But I really think this museum memorial, they nailed it.
Yeah, and the service was so moving. I mean, to hear the children's choir sing the song from West Side Story, There's a Place for Us, to me was just devastating. And, you know, between that and the remarks by the president, by the governor of New York, by the governor of New Jersey, you know, by Rudy Giuliani and the people that were there, and certainly the family members of the victims, it was incredibly moving. I mean, I obviously haven't been in the museum. It opens next week, but it's incredibly moving. I thought they hit the right tone in terms of the memorial service today.
You know, Dominic, obviously, we all covered it, and you were there. The principles that we heard, I mean, you've spoken to. Again, as I say, I think they got it right. For a while, we thought this thing would ever get built with all the fights. Remember what happened before, but at the end of the day, they seem to have really married those two things, that it's a historic location, but also it's in memoriam. And it's remembering and puts a human face on the first responders, the victims who didn't make it out, and so many things that surround it, and also the heroes who went so far above and beyond. And I think to be able to do that in one place is easier said than done.
Richard, a lot of political fighting, but that's New York, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way people do things in New York City, particularly when it comes to politics. But they did. The good news is that they got it right. Sometimes New York City doesn't get it right. In this case, they got it right. It's a tremendous learning experience. It brings back so much pain. I remember being there. City government officials didn't know where to hold news conferences. They didn't know where to go to inform the public. You had the mayor of the city, Rudy Giuliani, walking around with the police commissioner with no place to go. And so it brings back all of these memories, but you know, when it comes to a glass half full or half empty, I tend to be a half full type person. And so it's a learning experience about the humanity, your word, of Americans, of what people did. It didn't matter. Purple, blue, green, everybody came together. It didn't matter. Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, everybody came together. I will always remember, and I'm sorry for monopolizing the time, but I will always remember the West Side Highway, how people were, you could not take the train. It was like you were in the Twilight Zone. And people were walking down, bringing supplies and cheering first responders, things I'll never forget.
You know, Andrew, we were saying before, and of all the different, there was a debate about what this should be. Forget about where, and forget about where the money was coming from, and what it should, and who gets placement where on the wall. The very idea of what it should be, and again, as I said, it was a difficult marriage, I think, but it's certainly something that I definitely am going to go to, and I want to bring my kids to it too. And from what I understand from people who have been there already, it explains it in a way that doesn't gloss it over or put a pretty, you know, matted surface. It was an awful day, worst day in modern American history, but how many things changed after that too, and I think from what I understand, it really encapsulates that.
I mean, this museum has to do a lot of different things, and we've heard from family members who are unhappy because they've moved unidentified remains to that site, and they were given only a little bit of notice, so maybe there are some open questions as to whether they should have done that. For me, I know the history, and it's a painful one. And the moments after, the days after, the people's reaction and the unity that we felt, I'm warmed when I still think of that. But it still feels like the whole thing's something of an open sore for me. I mean, I think back, I look at the photos every time we have an anniversary of 9/11, and it's hard to watch. And it's still hard to watch. And I assume for all of us who lived through it, it will always be hard to watch. And I think that's going to be a difficult aspect of this memorial, of this museum. I don't know if somebody offered me tickets to go there tonight, if I would go and do it, just because it's still so raw and so fresh.
You know, it's funny, Scott. There's a debate, and in many newsrooms across, there's this unspoken thing: you're not to show the towers fall. And philosophically, people can have this conversation, but history isn't always pretty, and it should be hard. And bad things should be told in bad ways. And we've seen, I think, efforts to sometimes sanitize it at our own detriment. And we make the same mistakes because we sanitize things. And it's supposed to hurt. And I think that that's part of this. Yes, there's the great aftermath of what we did as a country, but it was terrible, and that's part of the story too.
It is. And the stunning horror.
And you put, before we started, you put a human face in this because you were Rockland County executive, and you lost 84 of the residents of your county on that day.
Including Wells Crowther, who the president talked about at length today, the man with the bandana, who was from Upper Nyack and a volunteer firefighter in Rockland County. But all of us who were there and watched live the horror of that, you have to understand the horror to appreciate the faces in the museum, because it comes back to those faces, those individual lives that were sacrificed in this terrorist attack. And you can't have one without the other, I'm afraid. But for Rockland County, of course, in those days, everything was shut down. Planes, there were jets flying around. We had no idea in those moments whether the rest of us were under attack. One of the largest malls in the United States, was it going to be hit by something? The true fear and horror and stunningness of this comes to the fore every time we go back every year, September 11th, and particularly today. I thought the memorial was so well done. Each politician given his proper due and a different perspective of what happens. But the most impressive were the stories, the young children who saw their parents, their father or their mother who didn't make it through. I just think it's a stunning, and it's raw. But for those of us who had a responsibility those days, you have to bring the horror in, because it is in fact what I think many speakers said. It's the hope that's provided in that museum that I think we should take away.
And again here, I think Scott and the table said it. It was a beautiful ceremony, and they're going to make attempts to replay it. And if you haven't seen it, because obviously many of you are at work today, please make an effort to. It'll be an hour well spent. Okay. And I want to ask the question that we kind of talked about here at the table, and you can answer this on Facebook and Twitter. Do you plan to visit the memorial and museum? And if yes, why? And if no, why as well? All right, coming back, everyone, we will switch to some politics. And there are both the local and state variety in New York. Republicans gathered in Westchester today, and at the convention, the man in front of you is the nominee, and we'll talk about his chances to be the next governor of New York. That and much more when we return.